Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome, everyone, to the Hooked on Movies podcast. Today, we will be looking at the 1977 classic from director George Lucas, the movie that started it all, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. With me, as always, are Ken.
I have a very bad feeling about this.
I do too. And Ted.
That's a name I've not heard in a long time.
And I'm Eric. And you know what, boys? I find your lack of faith disturbing, especially during this podcast. All right, we're talking Star Wars. We're talking the movie that kicked it off. Ted, give us the details on this one.
Star Wars was directed by George Lucas and a screenplay by George Lucas. It has a running time of 121 minutes. It was released May 25th, 1977. It had a budget of $11 million, and it has a box office gross of $775.8 million. Star Wars stars Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker, Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin, Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anthony Daniels as C-3PO, Kenny Baker as R2-D2, Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, David Prowse as Darth Vader, and James Earl Jones as the voice of Darth Vader.
All right. And what did the critics say about this?
On Rotten Tomatoes, it's a certified fresh critic score of 93%. It has an audience score of 96%. It was hard to kind of find some legitimate critics that had something bad to say about the movie. We'll start with them. I did find two. Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader said, "If you want to see the movie that made mild diversion for 10-year-old boys, the model of commercial filmmaking, ruling out nuanced characterization and emotions that last longer than 20 seconds, this is where to look." And Pauline Kael of The New Yorker said, "There's no breather in the picture, no lyricism. The only attempt at beauty is in the double sunset."
Wow.
Yeah, so they were pretty down on it, but most of our heavy hitters were on the positive side. I did find Gene Siskel from the Chicago Tribune. He said some of Lucas's script writing is clever, a hip updating of the stilted language of the old Flash Gordon serials. Also, the film is dotted with weird-looking creatures who might have stepped out of the pages of a Marvel comic book. And then Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times, he included Star Wars in his great movie series. And just an excerpt from his review in that. He says, "It's as goofy as a children's tale, as shallow as an old Saturday afternoon serial, as corny as Kansas in August, and a masterpiece. Like Birth of a Nation and Citizen Kane, Star Wars was a technical watershed that influenced many of the movies that came after. These films have little in common except for the way they came along at a crucial moment in cinematic history, when new methods were ripe for synthesis. Star Wars melded a new generation of special effects with the high-energy action picture. It linked space opera and soap opera, fairy tales and legend, and packaged them as a wild visual ride. If I were asked to say with certainty which movies will still be widely known a century or two from now, I would list 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, and Star Wars."
Impressive. First time we saw this movie. Let's go with you, Ken.
Saw it in the theaters. My parents took us to see it as little kids. I was only about 5 years old when it came out.
Wow.
So, yeah, I don't remember much about it. Little bits here and there I remember seeing it, but in general, I really didn't get into this until probably, I want to say it was like 81, 82, when it became a big thing on the movie channel on paid cable. The big thing was we're showing it 6 days or seven, I think it was 7 days in a row. We're going to play it. And that's when I really started getting into the Star Wars.
You know, for me, I honestly don't remember what format I saw it on. I remember I saw Return of the Jedi first in 83. And after that, I watched the other two. I'm thinking somewhere 83, 84, either like you, either cable or VHS rental. Were they on VHS rental in 84? Did Lucas release
Yeah,
them? I think he did,
they
yeah.
were out on
Yeah, so
VHS.
it had to be most likely VHS. And I was hooked. And we waited so long for another one. But I was hooked. What about you, Ted?
It would have been when I got my first VHS copy for Christmas. That's when I would have watched it because, like you, Eric, I saw Return of the Jedi first, and I was immediately hooked. And then from there, it was the toys, and then I got the VHS copies for Christmas. One of the few things that from childhood that I still am addicted to.
Sweet. Ken, think you can tell us the plot of this one via memory?
Well, I think if you guys out there haven't seen it yet, there's just something wrong. You should have seen it by now, even by accident. But I'll go ahead and give you as much as the plot as I can. Star Wars, Episode 4, A New Hope. We can do it as just Star Wars. Amid a galactic civil war, Rebel Alliance spies have stolen plans to the Galactic Empire's Death Star, a massive space station capable of destroying an entire planet. Imperial Senator Princess Leia, one of the rebels' leaders, has obtained its schematics, but her starship is intercepted by an Imperial Star Destroyer under the command of the ruthless Darth Vader. Before she is captured, Leia hides the plans in the memory systems of a droid named R2-D2, who flees in an escape pod to the nearby desert planet Tatooine alongside his companion, protocol droid C-3PO. The droids are captured by Jawa traders who sell them to moisture farmers and their nephew, Luke Skywalker. While Luke is cleaning R2-D2, he discovers a recording of Leia's requesting help from Obi-Wan Kenobi. Later, after Luke finds R2-D2 missing, he is attacked by scavenging sand people, but is rescued by an elderly hermit, Old Ben Kenobi, an acquaintance of Luke's father, who reveals that Obi-Wan is his true name. He tells Luke of the days as one of the Jedi Knights, the former peacekeepers of the Galactic Republic, who drew abilities from an energy field known as the Force, but were ultimately hunted to near extinction by the Empire. Luke learns that his father fought alongside Obi-Wan as a Jedi Knight during the Clone Wars until Vader, Obi-Wan's former pupil, turned to the dark side of the Force and murdered him. Obi-Wan offers Luke his father's old lightsaber, the signature weapon of a Jedi Knight. R2-D2 plays Leia's full message, in which she begs Obi-Wan to take the Death Star plans to her home planet of Alderaan and give them to her father. Although Luke initially declines Obi-Wan's offer to accompany him and learn the ways of the Force, he is left with no choice after discovering that Imperial stormtroopers have killed his aunt and uncle and has destroyed their farm in search of the droids. Traveling to a cantina to search for transport, Luke and Obi-Wan hire Han Solo, a smuggler with a price on his head due to his debt to a local mobster, Jabba the Hutt. Persuaded by stormtroopers, Obi-Wan, Luke, R2-D2, and C-3PO flee Tatooine with Han and his Wookiee co-pilot, Chewbacca, on their ship called the Millennium Falcon. Before the Falcon can reach Alderaan, Death Star Commander Grand Moff Tarkin destroys the planet in a show of force after interrogating Leia for the location of the Rebel Alliance base. Upon arrival, the Falcon is captured by the Death Star's tractor beam, but the group evades capture by hiding in the ship's smuggling compartments. As Obi-Wan leaves to disable the tractor beam, Luke persuades Han and Chewbacca to help him rescue Leia after discovering that she is scheduled to be executed. After disabling the tractor beam, Obi-Wan sacrifices himself in a lightsaber duel against Vader, allowing the rest of the group to escape the Death Star with Leia. Using a tracking device, the Empire tracks the Falcon to a hidden rebel base on Yavin 4. The schematics reveal a hidden weakness in the Death Star's thermal exhaust port, which could allow the rebels to trigger a chain reaction to its main reactor with a precise proton torpedo strike. While Han abandons the rebels after collecting his reward for rescuing Leia, Luke joins the X-Wing starfighter squadron in a desperate attack against the approaching Death Star. In the ensuing battle, the rebels suffer heavy losses as Vader leads a squadron of TIE fighters against them. Han and Chewbacca unexpectedly return to aid them in the Falcon and knock Vader's ship off course before he can shoot Luke down. Guided by the voice of Obi-Wan's spirit, Luke uses the Force to aim the torpedoes into the exhaust port, destroying the Death Star moments before it fires on the Rebel base. In a triumph ceremony at the base, Leia rewards Luke and Han, but not Chewie, medals for their heroism. The end. Poor Chewie.
Poor Chewie. And on a related note, Ted, did you watch that on YouTube without the music?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
Yeah, it was weird.
It was so weird.
I don't like it.
I love it.
It's-
I get a kick out of it every time.
It creeps me
So.
out.
What we're talking about, folks, is if you go to YouTube and you type in, I guess, Star Wars without music, you get certain scenes of the movie that they filmed and they put John Williams music over it after it. So you kind of get the behind the scenes as they're filming it, and it is hysterical. It is awesome.
It's very uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable, and I highly recommend it. So,
And before we start talking about the movie, why don't we talk about the score? Because we've already brought this up.
Okay.
How important this score is to this movie.
it's another
makes-
main character.
It might be the number one thing that makes this movie succeed. And I was listening to about John Williams before. I didn't know he did the music for Lost in Space, the TV show. John Williams at this particular time, kind of well known, but not as well known as he is to us now, right? Over the last few decades. Back then, he was known. Now he's known as the John Williams. Yeah, the music just sets everything up so nicely. And I think it's one of those things where George Lucas will even say that it exceeded his expectation. Like everything else was a pain for George Lucas. But the score itself, George Lucas was very proud of the score. It was the one thing that he just didn't have to worry about when everything came together.
It's magnificent. What is it, 46 Oscar nominations?
I'm just looking at some of the movies that he's done the score to.
He holds a record. Every major movie from the 80s that you can remember, he was the score.
I believe he did Jaws.
He did,
I think he
uncredited.
Yeah. There wasn't a Spielberg or Lucas. Everybody had him do the score. As Superman, Richard Donner, he was that one as well.
Did he do anything on the holiday special?
Probably not.
You got to bring up the holiday special, man. That's
No, we don't. We don't have to acknowledge that even exists.
If
YouTube.
you're out there, it's out there.
Yeah.
I've watched the whole thing. It is,
it's
without
out
a
there.
doubt, one of the most painful things I have ever seen.
I mean, come on,
It's-
B. Arthur, come on.
Oh,
You gotta
it
watch
is.
it for B. Arthur.
B. Arthur and Harvey Korman's in it too,
Harvey Korman, yeah.
and the
Yeah,
stupid
it's
Wookiee
not-
children.
it's not good.
It's horrible.
Hey, it's
Wookiee
Earth Day. Come on.
One thing I'll say about the soundtrack, by the way, is I remember how huge this soundtrack was. I mean, you think about it, it's orchestra music, but this is an era where, you have your 70s classic rock, you have punk,
Ken,
disco.
This is so big. There was a disco version of Star
There
Wars.
was a disco version of
was.
Star Wars. Yeah, I remember that.
Yep.
I remember going to a friend's house and they had the album and they would play it all the time. And they're like, this is so cool. And I'm thinking, okay. I mean, granted, I was only 6, 7 years old at the time when I heard this, but it's so surprising how a musical score was so big here in 77, 78. It's huge.
I want to say it was up until like The Bodyguard, The Empire Strikes Back soundtrack. It was, I think, the most bought soundtrack in history. John Williams' score here is, words just can't really even begin to describe how perfect it is.
Think about this for John Williams. He does this in 77, right? This comes out in May of 77. You guys know what comes out in December of 77? Close Encounters of the Third
was gonna
Kind,
say-
Close Encounters,
which
yeah.
John Williams also did the score
Yeah.
for. The man was on fire.
Oh, yeah, he was for the next 2 decades.
Well, we brought that up about Jaws.
Yeah.
That's what got him this job was
Yeah.
the score from Jaws. All I remember is this poster, this album cover of Star Wars where Luke Skywalker's all muscular bound. And I'm thinking, Mark Hamill is not muscular. He's got all that chisel chest feature and he's holding
Yeah, it
a
ain't Mark.
lightsaber up in the air.
No. Yep.
No.
It's a very fantasy-based cover.
And then you have a very voluptuous Princess Leia,
Princess Leia,
alongside him.
Which by Return of the Jedi kind of worked for most men. But I would say this about John Williams is each scene he uses the right type of tone and the right type of arrangement for it. When you just have Princess Leia, it gets softer. And if you have a battle scene, you get a lot of uppity up kind of because you're in the battle. The music it just fits the scenes perfectly throughout the whole movie, and I think that's what makes it work so well.
And to throw even more plaudits at the score, 20th Century Fox, who distributed Star Wars, when their logo appears on screen, it has that dump da da dump da da dump. The drum. That was not part of 20th Century Fox's stuff until Star Wars. John Williams thought that there should be something leading in to the black screen of a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and then boom, the hit of the Star Wars theme. He wrote that. They adopted it in perpetuity.
You have to think that 2001 was kind of an inspiration for the start of this movie with that musical intro.
Definitely.
Especially with a sci-fi fantasy film like this, you need a big opening number to start everything off. And what a great way to start off with the Star Wars logo just boom showing. And then you're hearing that music along with a little story, a little background on what's going on. It's a perfect way to kind of start everything out. And then we go right into a little bit of a battle scene between these two ships. One of the things I definitely remember as a kid, how big this ship was. I was in awe of seeing this big ass ship. It just didn't seem like it would end. It reminds me of, well, Spaceballs made fun of it.
Yes, they did. Yes.
They just kept on going and going and going.
Yeah.
Well, and you have the Flash Gordon scroll. Because you know you're being plopped down into the middle of a story. Scroll gives you exactly what you need leading into what you're going to see immediately after. It's a great device that Lucas uses here. Just another thing that's become iconic. It's perfect because, like you said, Ken, you know that there's a ship that's being chased. And immediately there it is. It's being chased by a monster ship. The thing that makes it great is that it's a practical effect and it's a model.
And it's done so well. It looks realistic. Even by 2023 standards, it looks incredible. Think about watching that in 77 and looking at some of those special effects, and you're like, oh my goodness, it looks so incredible.
Well, George Lucas purposely did it that way. He kind of wanted these ships just kind of flat surfaces. He wanted to make it look as real as possible. That's a testament to his vision. But this thing took a long time to come about. They were way behind with the special effects by the time they shot the movie itself. I think they were behind, I want to say like almost 6 months. This was supposed to be a Christmas release and ended up being a May release instead because of all the problems that they had with the regular shooting. But on top of that, he was asking for things that were never done before. They had a hard time getting it there. And it's just amazing how everything kind of fell into place when it was all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these effects and everything, we're talking about Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, which was a company that Lucas founded. They created these effects on their own. Just to think about that is just amazing. They created this all. It's so awesome to think that, these guys, they had nothing to go off of. And here they created it. And it's like they created a universe out of nothing. If we're going to throw the plaudits at John Williams, which we definitely should, another person that really, I guess he gets heralded now because Star Wars fans have made him famous, is Ben Burtt, the guy who does all of the sound effects. He created these sound effects by combining different sounds. Like, who would have thought to take a hammer to electrical cable that stretched between two poles, and he would hit it with a hammer, and that's the sound of a blaster going off. He's crazy. He's another genius.
So you combine like different sounds to get Chewbacca's voice, like different animal sounds and things of that nature, and then R2-D2, just children sounds and things of that nature, just to get the right sound for R2-D2. Like we said, I mean, you have 2001, which was visually stunning, and you can use some of that stuff probably from 2001 as your basis, but that wasn't a space battle. You didn't have anybody shooting phaser. You didn't have these dogfights in space. That really wasn't happening. I mean, you had stuff like that kind of like in Star Trek, but not to this effect.
So was Buck Rogers around then?
Buck Rogers was not around yet. In fact, I would tell you that probably Buck Rogers probably took a lot of cues from Star Wars to make their show look the way it did.
Yeah, you're right. It was 79-81 for Buck Rogers.
Yeah, and Battlestar Galactica, all those used probably Star Wars type of special effects to make this work. But Star Trek back in the 60s whenever they had a battle, it was these two ships that basically they didn't move. They shot phasers and that's all that happened. Then you would see this explosion and that would be it. There was no movement of the actual ships. And so this was very ahead of its time. Later on, we get a lot of this in the 80s, a lot of this Star Wars type of films.
Right. A lot of these guys are geniuses because, like you said, with the space battles, what Lucas wanted to recreate was the World War II fighter movies from his youth. One of the things that he used, there was a John Hughes movie, not John Hughes,
Howard Hughes.
He wanted to use the Howard Hughes style airplane battles, which Hughes famously used real planes in a lot of his movies, much to the chagrin of the studios because of the expense. That's what he wanted to recreate with these space battles. And you really get that, especially attacking the Death Star. That's where you get that Howard Hughes feeling.
I actually get that feeling from the Millennium Falcon going against the TIE fighters because that reminded me of the gunners that would sit in those planes. And I saw something that showed that. That's where I think of him using that old footage to recreate. I mean, he creates lots of things here. We talked about Flash Gordon already because he was a big fan of Flash Gordon. In fact, that was one of those things that he really wanted to do was a Flash Gordon movie. But he also took things from like Robin Hood. The sword fights of Errol Flynn and things of that nature. He wanted to recreate that. So there was a lot of stuff that he grew up with that he wanted to enter into this movie, and he did it to such a great effect.
Yeah, to get the basis of the story, too, because here again, he's creating myth and mythology out of thin air. He brought on, I want to say the guy was from Oxford, who was a professor of myths and rituals and things of that nature.
I think he wrote some books. I think one was called The Many Masks of God, that's the one I'm thinking of.
And he helped Lucas create what is almost a religion.
Some people would say it is.
And a whole mythos. That's what sets Star Wars above everything else, in my opinion. See, and then this is something when we do start to get to the other movies. When I first saw it, Star Wars wasn't A New Hope, it was Star Wars. It's the only one of the movies that can stand alone by itself, because it has a distinct beginning, middle, and end. Whereas Empire Strikes Back, even though it's probably a better movie, it needs Return of the Jedi to finish the chord. It's an unfinished movie. It leaves you with a cliffhanger. You have to get to the next movie. Whereas Star Wars doesn't need a sequel. It's its own entity. And that's one of the brilliant things of this, because nobody expected this movie to make any money. 20th Century Fox did it as a lark, and like Kenneth said, that they were so far behind, they had written the movie off as a loss, and that's why they moved it to May. Remember, this is not a time in 1977 where Memorial Day was a huge movie weekend.
No, that was Jaws when it first came out.
Star Wars created Memorial Day weekend to be a movie weekend. That's what brought everything up. And then Jaws was the summer blockbuster. That's why it was pushed to Memorial Day weekend, because 20th Century Fox had no faith in the movie. They didn't do a whole lot of promotion for the movie.
It was word of mouth. People went and saw the movie 5-10 times.
Exactly.
Well, I agree with you and disagree with you at the same time, because first of all, they gave $8 million to this movie, which ended up being 11 because they went over schedule. Nobody gets $8 million for a movie unless you believe it. And I believe his name was Alan Ladd Jr. Kind of took over 20th Century Fox. And he was the one that really stood behind this movie and made it possible for them to move forward, because the board was losing faith because of all the delays. But I think initially they really wanted to make this work and thought it could make money. Why else would you give it $8 billion? But George Lucas did something that was ingenious at the time. He wanted the ability to have all rights to merchandising.
He wanted all the copyrights.
You want all the copyrights, but also the ability to make T-shirts and toys and things of that nature. He even wrote a comic book that they made before this movie even came out that basically chronicled the whole story. In fact, I got one of these for Return of the Jedi when they did it. It was pretty cool having a Return of the Jedi comic book that told you the whole story of Return of the Jedi. It was ingenious. I saw this on one of the documentary specials. He had promoted San Diego Comic-Con, which wasn't the Comic-Con we know today, right? So
Exactly.
he knew what avenues to search out the nerds of the 70s to get hyped up on this. So I don't even think it was even word of mouth. I think by the time that this was about ready to be released, people were looking forward to this.
The people who wanted it knew about it.
Yes.
You're exactly right. And I believe Lucas took less money from being a director. 20th Century Fox was more than eager to give him a pay cut to sign off all of the merchandising rights and everything like that.
Because no one merchandised anything up until Star Wars.
Not really. That has went down as one of the worst contracts ever signed in movie history because of the fact that the merchandising is what made George Lucas a billionaire.
Just like Spaceballs.
Right.
Merchandising. Where the real money's at.
You're right. I think it was Alan Ladd Jr.
Yeah.
And this happens too with Lucas's best friend, Steven Spielberg.
Mm-hmm.
He had one guy who just stood behind him and kept the light burning for him to continue to make his movie as well. And we can't go without saying that here's a case of one hand washing the other. I mean, Lucas and Spielberg are best friends, and their best friend is Francis Ford Coppola. Without The Godfather, Jaws, and Star Wars don't get made.
And American Graffiti.
And American Graffiti.
That was
American
huge
Graffiti.
for George Lucas to get this off the ground because that gave him credibility. Before that, he had...
THX 1138.
It's a very good movie, but it was like a movie before its time. So
Very strange.
Strange and low budgeted, but American Graffiti is what really helped him. And Coppola having that cred also helped him with the casting of what we get now. Mark Hamill. Harrison Ford was actually,
He's a carpenter.
He was a carpenter, but he was also in American Graffiti. He actually wasn't considered for the part, but they brought him in to read lines with everybody. When it was all said and done, they just decided to go with Harrison Ford. I remember they had Kurt Russell as a possibility for Han Solo as well, which that would have been interesting. I actually could see Kurt Russell as a young Han Solo. That could have probably worked. But then I also saw Cindy Williams trying out for Princess Leia, and that didn't look good at all. I think we get Carrie Fisher perfectly here. She has that mixture of firmness, but she could do comedy if she had to. She seems to be more of a serious actor, and she had to look for it. But the weird thing is, like, the other actors were older, playing younger, whereas she was younger playing older. And she was 19 years old, and you were buying her more of somebody that was like in her mid-20s at least.
And dating Harrison Ford.
That wasn't until Empire Strikes Back.
So he waited at least till she's in her 20s.
Harrison was still
married, wasn't he?
He was still married at this time.
Dun, dun, dun.
No, it depends on what book you read of Carrie Fisher.
Right.
Well, she does tell a lot of tales, but she goes toe-to-toe here with Peter Cushing. And see, and this is the other thing, too. Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing lent their credibility to this movie. These are two guys that are respected beyond belief in the movie community, even though Alec Guinness, to the day he died, said he didn't know what the movie was about. But Alec Guinness set the tone for what really would become a modern-day actor's contract for Star Wars. He took a lower salary to get points off of the gross. So he got paid big-time money when this movie exploded. And that's why he came back for Empire Strikes Back, and that's why he came back for Return of the Jedi. And notoriously, that's what Jack Nicholson has done a lot, especially when he was in Tim Burton's Batman. That's another one of these contracts that's looked at as one of the more lopsided contracts in Hollywood history.
I think it's interesting that you bring up Jack Nicholson, because when I think of Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing, I think of our discussion about Jack Nicholson in broadcast news, where you needed that anchor who demanded respect. All your other actors are no-name actors. Even though Harrison Ford was in American Graffiti, he wasn't a well-known actor.
He was in it so briefly, too.
So they needed big, heavy hitters that we could look at and say, oh, yeah, you needed somebody to be the ultimate wizard. Well, that's Alec Guinness. And you needed somebody to be the baddie. And since Darth Vader was behind a mask, we needed a face to go with that. And that was Peter Cushing, which at that time was extremely well known for the Hammer horror films. And that comes from the English side of kind of, because there's a lot of stuff that was done over in England. A lot of the production was done in England. Some of the production was done in Africa, especially the desert scenes and Luke's home. It's a testament to George Lucas to know what he needed and for what parts. And he knew that he just can't go with the whole cast of nobodies. He needed heavy hitters, well-established actors, and of course, James Earl Jones as the voice of Darth Vader.
But even then, James Earl Jones wasn't a household name. He was originally uncredited for this role, which is kind of ironic. But the uncredited thing is really an interesting thing because Lucas used a lot of uncredited voice actors. Like you said, a lot of this was filmed in England at Pinewood Studios. They used a lot of English character actors, but he didn't want the whole movie to sound British.
Right.
So what they did was they hired rock DJs. He got through his connections through American Graffiti, and rock and roll DJs provided a lot of this voiceover work for a lot of the other characters.
Like
and
what, for example?
In the final scenes, when they're fighting the Death Star, those aren't the real guys' voices. Those
the ones, the pilots?
Right.
Dak and all those guys?
Those are all voiced over. Somebody who was uncredited and didn't tell anybody until 2005. He finally came out and admitted that he was a voice actor with Harry Shearer from This Is Spinal Tap. He was an uncredited voice actor in Star Wars.
Funny thing is, the original guy they had in mind for the voice of Darth Vader was Orson Welles. But
Yes.
they were afraid that Orson Welles would be so well known, his voice. And so they had to go with somebody. He might have already had trouble breathing as it was, so they probably didn't need a special effect for that. Which I guess the special effect of that was scuba diving equipment.
It's a scuba diver respirator, yeah.
Some of the things that they had to use here to make these things work is just kind of incredible. So we go back to the beginning of the movie and we have the rebel ship that's captured by the Empire. And we see there's this little battle that's happening between the stormtroopers and the rebels. After the smoke clears, we see Darth Vader. What is your first impressions of Darth Vader?
I was terrified as a kid.
I'll be honest, the movie for me, I loved that initial battle scene between the stormtroopers, and for whatever reason, I just love it as they're sitting there waiting, knowing that stormtroopers are going to blast through that door. I think it's a simple battle scene, but I think it really sets it up very well. And of course, then you get Darth Vader coming in with that John Williams score behind him. It is pretty cool. I have to admit, it's definitely something like you said. I wouldn't say I was scared, but I was like, I don't know how to put it in words. When you think of evil, when you think of bad guys, you don't think of something like that. So when the first time you see it, you're just like, wow.
I wasn't scared until I heard James Earl Jones's voice. Now, I won't say scared, but menacing is probably a good word for it. Once that voice matched up to what we now know as Darth Vader, that works great for me. The funny thing here, though, in this scene is how R2-D2 and C-3PO somehow are able to cross this area without being shot at. Everybody's shooting. It's not like they're like really fast. They take their time, it seems like, to go across the way, and they're left unharmed. But I love how Vader just takes that guy and he like holds him up in the air and basically breaks his neck there at the end and kills him.
Yeah.
That right there sets the tone about the bad guy that we have here. What he's capable of doing.
Don't mess with him.
It's like the Old West when the bad guy comes into town and kills a civilian or kills the sheriff or whatever the case
right off
may
the
be.
bat. Yeah.
Right off the bat, we set the tone of the baddie and know that this is somebody not to mess with.
He's perfect here, and I think, too, it's also heightened because everything else is so sanitary. Everything around him is white, and then here he is in black. I mean, he's in black head to toe. Yeah, holy crap.
Even Princess Leia's in white.
Yeah, everyone,
white.
Yeah.
Everything's in white except for him. And yeah, the first thing you see him do, he looks at the dead bodies and it doesn't even faze him. And then the next time you see him, he's choking a guy and he kills him. This guy is evil. This is evil incarnate.
Not only is he choking him, he's still asking him questions as he's dying. He doesn't even get the answer because he really doesn't care. if this is a ambassadorship,
Yeah.
where's the ambassador? And he's just dead. He can't answer you that question because you already killed them.
And to the actor's credit, when they come into the conference room and they're having that meeting, Peter Cushing and Darth Vader walk in there. Even those guys, they're so good, they play it perfectly that when he walks in, they are all scared.
And they all have English accents. I love
They
it.
do. Well, the entire empire is British.
Yes,
accents.
it's British, right?
It's
Yes.
pretty funny, which is why they did the voiceovers for the rebels. Yeah, he's terrifying.
I find your lack of faith disturbing. That's
Right.
one of my favorite parts of that scene where he's just choking the guy.
He's choking a guy and he doesn't even have him around the neck.
Right.
And it's that point you're like, this guy, he's not to be messed with. And then, of course, he kills. Well, there's the debate. Does he kill Obi-Wan or does Obi-Wan allow himself to be?
Is that really even a
kills-
debate?
He kills a major character.
Yeah, on
I mean,
purpose.
He's the only major character that dies in the whole movie.
Well, it's
And
set up that way.
And Darth Vader kills him. He stomps on his empty cloak. It's
Just
like,
to make sure he's dead.
I have a different impression throughout the years because of all the other movies now.
Yeah,
I think that Obi-Wan's Force Ghost had already taken over, just like we see in the other movies with
Wait. Say that again. What?
when he closes his eyes and holds the lightsaber getting ready
Correct.
to get hit,
Yes.
he's already channeling the Force to he's already disappearing into a Force Ghost because his powers are coming to an end. Which I didn't think about this until later, until we see Luke and Yoda and Leia, where the Force life goes away, they disappear. Their body disappears. I think that might be what happens here. Because we don't actually see him beheaded. He's totally gone.
The lightsaber went through his torso, not his head.
We don't see a body coming apart. Next thing you see is an empty cloak. And he's stomping on it. There's nothing there. I think he's already gone by the time he puts that lightsaber through him.
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't think that, but now I do.
It's suicide, but it's suicide. It's known suicide.
Because he's already saying, run, Luke, run. So he's already transferred over to being a Force Ghost. That's my theory of it now. But like I said, back in 77 and throughout the 80s and throughout the 90s and probably just until the recent sequel trilogy came out, that's what I thought. But now I've changed my mind on, I don't think Darth Vader ever killed him.
No. Well, is there anyone out there who thinks that?
I don't know. That's my own personal opinion, at least.
I can see his point. That's one of those things that you can, chicken and egg type of a thing you can talk about until forever. We could have a whole episode on it.
We are.
This is the thing, too. We love John Williams' score, but Darth Vader is scary without his theme. He doesn't get his theme, the Imperial March, and Darth Vader's theme until Empire Strikes Back. So even though the music is more of a dark type of music, he doesn't even have his iconic music at this point. That's how menacing he is. He's a menacing character. He's written in these first two movies. It's as good as it gets as far as a villain goes.
And you know what's really great about this is you go to a menacing villain to the comic relief of the droids.
Right.
You know, with them going in to the escape pod. And I'm sorry, why wouldn't you shoot down that escape pod regardless if there was
Exactly, right? Come on.
Yeah. Shoot the thing down, okay? But we get to see them on the planet. They're bickering like an old married couple. Especially C-3PO, which, you know, Anthony Daniels does a great job with his voice. Because if you hear his voice originally for the part, it doesn't fit right. But they knew they had adjusted. They've actually brought voice actors to try to change the voice of C-3PO. But Anthony Daniels was able to change his voice himself to make that part work. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, I guess he had a beef with Kenny Baker for their time together, which I don't know why that's the case, but
I don't know.
They just didn't get along for whatever reason. But on screen, everything works. It's the perfect married couple that are bickering, and we don't even need R2-D2 to say anything. It's kind of amazing how a person who's inside R2-D2 can make movements, and then you have the sounds that are provided to kind of give us a feel of R2-D2 and what he's going through. Like, especially when C-3PO walks away, and R2-D2 is kind of sad. We feel sad with him.
There is script for R2-D2, and Kenny Baker does say the script, but it's drowned out by the
sounds,
by the sounds and stuff. And that's a tradition that continues through. Like Bill Hader did the voice for BB-8 in the
Right.
sequel trilogy. But so yeah, that's a thing. But no, 3PO and R2D2 here, they provide what is necessary because R2D2 is more of the risk taker. C3PO is more of the fatalistic.
He's a little bit of a
yeah,
coward, but you need this comic relief from being so serious. If the whole tone of the
right,
movie was so serious, it doesn't do as well. And I think that's
right.
the great thing about this movie is its ups and downs with its comedy and its seriousness. It takes the right approach at the right times. It's so serious, now we need comedy. Oh, it's so serious, now we need the romance. We don't go too far with the romance or the comedy, so let's get back to the serious part of the movie. I think that's really well balanced here, and it's one of the things that make this movie so great. And I think it's one of the problems with the other movies that we get from Star Wars later on, especially in the prequels. You just don't have that right balance that goes back and forth. But here, it's perfectly done.
We'll discuss the problems with the prequels, but and as they say, they are legion. You've got good characters, even the droid characters, and that's what makes them beloved, is that they're written so well. This is not going to be a running theme of George Lucas going forward as far as writing a coherent script. He really knocks it out of the park here. And let's get one thing straight. The dialogue here
is okay.
Is not the best.
It's just okay.
George Lucas doesn't know how regular people talk. I don't know why.
Yeah, Carrie Fisher says it comes off great on the page when you type it up, but it's impossible to say, is what she says about his scripts.
Yeah, for some reason, he has no idea. Whereas, like, Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith know how human beings talk, George Lucas has none of that. But as far as telling a story, he knows how to tell a story. I think is the best, most perfect character in the entire movie is Han Solo. He's as cool can be. He is the epitome of everything, in my opinion. He has always been my favorite character. He's just awesome. And let's go back to the original versions of these movies. The first time we see Han Solo, he's sliding into that seat in the cantina. He's not the one taking the meeting. He has Chewbacca do the legwork, and then he slides in. It just cool as cool can be.
He's the closer.
Yeah.
He is the closer, yeah.
And the first thing we really see him do is, one, he's bragging about how fast his ship is. But then the next thing we see him do, he shoots a guy.
Han shot first.
Exactly. George Lucas has tried to explain why he decided to change that scene, and it will never be right. And I think it's funny because I don't know if he still does, but he was wearing a shirt that said Han shot first. I don't know why he changed this. He had some weird reasoning to that he thought that a beloved character shouldn't be seen murdering somebody right off the bat. And I think that that's a ridiculous logic.
It's not like the guy was innocent. It wasn't like the guy he shot was an innocent person. He was going to kill him as well.
Exactly. So he's a bounty hunter.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we actually think it's kind of cool that he actually shoots first.
Yeah.
That's what we like about him. He's a space cowboy.
Exactly. He's a badass. When they're in the Death Star and everybody's confronted with the stormtroopers, he chases the stormtroopers down the hallway until he runs into a whole group of them.
Yeah.
And then
he's not very bright though. Let's say that. He doesn't make the wisest decisions sometimes. But yeah, he's an enjoyable character. I mean, throughout the film, and his relationship with Princess Leia is the typical I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I love you type of relationship. And I think it's played off very well between the two. And it goes back to what I said about Carrie Fisher at the beginning. She's 19 years old and she's playing it like she's a seasoned vet. She holds her own with somebody. Harrison Ford at this particular time was probably in his mid-30s. Correct me if I'm wrong. So. Early to mid-30s. So. He's at least about 13 or 14 years older than her. You don't notice the age difference. Why? She acts like she belongs there, and I really like that about Carrie Fisher's performance here. Harrison Ford, I like him throughout this movie. The only time that I cringe now at this episode with Harrison Ford in it is when George Lucas brings unneeded things like Greedo shot first. Greedo just totally missed him completely, like the worst shot ever, right?
Oh, I know.
And then later on, we see Han talking with Jabba the Hutt. And I'm sorry, that
horrible
scene is
horrible scene.
atrocious now.
It is.
It's bad CGI, first of all.
Yes.
Second of all, he steps on Jabba's tail.
I hate that.
Oh, and that's George later on.
And
thinking
Jabba's
he
a
could-
little bit of a pansy, if you think about it.
A little bit. If you think about it
a
here.
little. Yeah.
He's not the scary individual that we meet in Return of the Jedi.
No, not at
No.
all.
And here's the other thing. What does Han say to him as soon as he's leaving? He says, "You're a great human being."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
you're
wanted
a
to
great human
choke
being.
He
on-
says that
Yeah, he does.
he's being Han Solo sarcastic, but it's not.
It's a
It's
stupid
not.
line.
It's not good. This was a scene that George Lucas fell in love with back in '76, and they couldn't figure out how to do it.
Right.
So he got himself all into a tizzy when they could finally do the CGI of Jabba the Hutt and included this scene. I don't care for it. It's not necessary. I do like some of the dialogue between them. It shouldn't have been Jabba. It should have been somebody else. The thing that's wasted here, when we come out of these three movies, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, there's one character that became an anti-hero, and that was Boba Fett. This scene ruins the introduction of Boba Fett, because now all of a sudden, oh yeah, Boba Fett was in the original too. So now he's in all three movies. But that was not the case. We don't meet Boba Fett until Empire Strikes Back. And it was a way to shoehorn that and him into the original movie. It's not needed. And this is part of the reason why everyone who's a Star Wars fan, not everyone, there are people who prefer this version.
Well, there are
That's
people who've never seen the original version
That-
because it's no
well,
longer
that's-
available.
That's true. It's why we've, as a collective fan base, have been petitioning Disney, who owns the Star Wars franchise now, to re-release the original uncut versions. But for whatever reason, Lucas stood pat that he never wanted the originals re-released.
That takes away from the job that some of these guys did in the 70s. Now you paint over your picture and you take away the artistry of what originally was there. And that's wrong. I was saying this earlier off the podcast. This doesn't feel like a 1977 movie at times, which bothers me. I like the 70s version. This version that we see now, the 4K recut, it feels too modern for me. Or better yet, it's uneven sometimes because at times it still does feel like the 70s version. And then all of a sudden it feels like this movie was just made.
With bad CGI.
One of the big sequences that you really get that is when Obi-Wan, Luke, and the droids are coming into Mos Eisley.
Oh yeah, that's
and
horrible.
there's all of the fake stuff there. And here again, all of these things, they were practical effects that these guys created. And I agree with Ken to a certain extent. It really takes away from some of the really intelligent things that they did to create some of these practical effects. I get wanting to clean some of it up, but when he went and started altering things, he should have left the story alone.
But be proud
And
of your
just-
finished product. Be proud of it. When you
exactly.
when you do this to it, it makes it seem like you weren't proud of your finished product. And maybe he wasn't. There have been some documentaries that I've listened to that indicate that even though he released it in 77, he was still unhappy with it. And
Right.
that's unfortunate. Again, like I said, you had somebody that worked on it and they could say, oh, that's something I worked on. And now you can't say that because now that original cut is lost to, well, the good news is it's not lost to time because people have it out there. You just have to,
Right.
you could buy it. You can go on eBay or thrift stores sometimes have it. And it's not expensive. We've seen some for as low as $50 on eBay for the trilogy. But going back to the film, because that's what we want to do and talk about these wonderful characters. You say that Han Solo is your favorite character. I actually go with Luke here. I think it's because Luke is the dreamer.
He's kind of whiny.
He's a little whiny, but he's kind of like the average person. He just wants to get out of there. He wants to go to college. It's not really college. It's like some type of flight school or whatever.
He wants to enlist in the army.
Yeah, he wants to go out and he wants to fight because, well,
Right.
what does he want to do? Be a farmer the rest of his life? That's not for him. I mean, it might be good for some people, but it's not good for him. And I think that's what we like about Luke is the fact that he dreams big. But when the dream comes to almost reality, he almost runs away from it. And if it isn't for his aunt and uncle basically being evaporated to the point of all we get is their skeletons, I don't know what the hell they did to them. When I first saw that there was these two skeletons, I'm like, who the heck is that? How do they do that? What do they do? Set a flamethrower to them or something?
I guess.
I mean, don't know.
We do know that there are fire troopers in later episodes, but
we see Luke dares out into the sky to the moon, so we get that famous shot of him looking out. But once his aunt and uncle are gone, then he does join, and he gets to learn about the Force from Ben. I love Luke Skywalker because, like I said, he's kind of like us. He's put kind of like a dreamlike adventure here. He kind of responds at times kind of like that. It's like he doesn't know how to kind of respond to girls. He's got, Leia. He's got a little bit of a crush on her. When Han shows that he has a crush, or if he doesn't look like he's interested, it makes him go either way. Like, he's like, what do you think of her? And he goes, I tried not to, kid. And he's like, good. And then he goes, well, then Luke just gets frustrated. I like that about Luke Skywalker. He has to rise to the occasion.
It's the hero's journey.
And I think more people can relate to Luke than they can with Han, but I agree with you in the sense that Han is everything. Han is the comic relief. Han is the maverick. Han is that gunslinger that I said about. He's like the sheriff that comes in and does things his own way. That's Han.
And he gets better throughout all three movies.
Except in Return of the Jedi.
No, he was done with it by then.
And there are some very obvious places in Return of the Jedi. We'll put it less than interested in being there.
Right.
We'll discuss that when we discuss the next two movies about how that all broke down. But Luke is the hero's journey. He is the hero. And that's why he gets the iconic French horn solo looking at the two sunsets. And you get that iconic hero's moment. Not only is it beautiful, both the music and the actual shot.
The cinematography in this movie is incredible.
Yeah, that establishes real quick that this is our hero. The one thing that strikes me, and I really didn't think about it until I was listening to another one of my favorite podcasts, which is the Star Wars Minute podcast. Luke is upset that Obi-Wan's dead, and Leia is comforting him, and she lost an entire planet.
It's true. Yeah, right. She lost Alderaan. Yeah.
Probably had her mom and dad on it.
Oh,
so.
It did.
Whole family. Sorry you lost a 100-year-old man.
Because that's where the plans had to go to. So we know that's where her dad was. Yeah, it's... Again, she acts the more grown-up person out of the three. She acts the oldest.
It's kind of unreasonable, though. She lost an entire planet.
Right. I've never thought about that.
And
the whole
he
time,
lost somebody that he knows for the last couple of days, right?
Right.
2 days. It makes me laugh. But
that also says what they are. Princess Leia, she's a warrior. She's dealt with loss before. And she will continue to deal with loss, and that just comes with the territory. With him, he's new to all this. He's been sheltered his whole life. Losing his aunt and uncle, and then finding Obi-Wan, it reminds me of the Harry Potter series and Sirius Black. And we'll talk about Harry Potter probably one of these days down the road.
Hold your breath on that.
Oh, yes, we will. Yes, we will. And I know other people that are listening to this podcast can't wait for us to do that. But he's just a naive little boy who has to grow up. And he grows up fast because he has to. Everybody's relying on him. And he does have the gift of the Force. Spoiler alert, he is the son of Darth Vader.
What?
Whoa, when did this happen?
What the hell?
Well, you know what? If you haven't figured that out after 46 years, then that's on you.
Man.
Wow. Newsflash.
Tossing out stuff like that. I didn't even know that was a fact.
Don't get me on the kiss.
Anyway.
Oh, I love the kiss. The kiss is awesome.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Luke Skywalker is an amazing character. Even though he's Red 5 in the attack on the Death Star, he ends up leading the final attack, even though Biggs and Wedge have seniority over him. But he takes control. Like I said, that's part of the hero's journey.
Well, you look at all those formations that they're in. I mean, how does he know how to be in any of this stuff?
Right.
When he's just plugged and played into here. I mean, and of course we get that scene where he sees his childhood friend that we don't get to know Biggs at all because that is all taken out. Actually, that's probably one thing that I wish that Lucas would have put in there was the fact that he had friends.
Yeah, a little bit of a flashback or something.
Well,
Or
There's a
there
deleted
is a
scene on
deleted
that.
scene. And that's where we get Luke's nickname. You know Luke's nickname? Wormy.
Wormy.
Because it's in
That
that
sounds like
scene.
more that Han Solo would get as a
Yeah.
nickname.
The scene that you're talking about, he finally makes it to Tashi Station, and that's where he sees Biggs, and Biggs goes off. Yeah, he meets and he has friends there, and they his nickname is Wormy. I'm kind of glad that was cut out.
But it's just awkward in that sense because he sees his friend, and then you have, I don't know if he's the squadron leader or what, but he comes in and he's like, "You think you can handle this?" And then Biggs is like,
well,
he's the best pilot, on the outer rim, and he's like, "Oh, you'll do fine then."
that whole scene, that was rewritten. The original written scene, and it was actually filmed.
You're gonna die.
No, that guy says he knew Anakin. And he goes, if you're half as good as your father was, you're going to be good. That whole scene played out much differently as originally, and it was actually filmed. But for whatever reason, they changed it to where he's like, hey, can he even handle this, Skywalker? And Big sticks up for him. There are some decisions that were made along the way that kind of are head scratchers.
There's so much to talk about this movie. It's hard to kind of keep everything in a small episode here that we're doing. We also have Chewbacca. We don't understand him much. I guess Han can speak
Wookiee.
Wookiee. I'm always interested how people understand certain aliens. Like later on, we'll find in the other episodes that Rey can speak to droids for some reason.
Doesn't C-3PO speak Wookiee too?
He
6
speaks
million languages.
different languages.
Yes.
I do love the part, of course, where they're playing chess and R2 gets him all rattled. He gets mad and C-3PO just goes, well, he made a fair move. And then Han's like, it's not good to upset a Wookiee. And he's like, well, nobody worries about a droid. And he's like, well, because droid doesn't pull arms out of sockets when they lose. Let the Wookiee win.
He gets screwed at the end. He should have gotten a medal too.
He gets the
J.J.
medal
Abrams,
later.
Yeah, J.J. Abrams kind of corrected that
After Han
died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Han dies?
At
The hell
very,
movie are we
very,
doing
very
here? Oh.
Not this movie.
It takes a long time, but he does. There is so much to talk about. I mean, we could have a whole entire podcast just based off Star Wars and the different stuff. And there's a lot of really good Star Wars podcasts out there. If this is your thing, the content is out there. It's a seminal movie, and this is where, because we've brought up 2001, and why I brought that up in the Roger Ebert thing that I read from the great movies, he brings up 2001. I don't know if I said this when we did highlight 2001, but there's a difference between 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars. 2001: A Space Odyssey is more science. It's more reality-based science. Whereas Star Wars is a fantasy. It's a true sci-fi. While it does have some science in it, it's more like Excalibur. You talked about the original poster, Ken, with Luke is all ripped and everything, and it's a basic play off of the Arthurian legend of Excalibur. He's holding the lightsaber. There's so many things that are at play here. It's really brilliant.
I think this movie hits us at the right time in 77 because we have so many movies that are not uplifting, and many documentaries talk about this. We've went through a bunch of 70s movies, and there's not a lot of feel-good type of movies in the 70s because of all the things that are going on. When we've done Taxi Driver, and to me Taxi Driver is kind of the epitome of a 70s movie. I talked about this before. You have that kind of 70s dark film over it, which makes it look a little, darker and grittier. And we have all the disaster movies of the 70s. I know Eric loves the airport films and, the Poseidon Adventure and
Towering Inferno.
Towering Inferno. Yeah, you had all these worst case scenario type of movies. You didn't have the Arthurian or the Robin Hood. You don't have those movies at this particular time, but you bring it to us again in a different type of format, science fiction. And I think it's just the perfect storm for people to jump onto. It's a story that's been told before, but space is being used. The Force is being used. We talked about the influences of Robin Hood and Flash Gordon and King Arthur and all coming together into one film. it resonates with everybody because everybody can at least resonate with one of those type of things. And I think that's why this movie really takes off like a rocket.
Think about this. I would argue that without Star Wars, I don't think you have Dino De Laurentiis as 1980 Flash Gordon. Just with the special effects alone, I don't even think that would even come to mind to do the movie.
And Ken brought up Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Harry Potter doesn't exist without Star Wars.
Because Harry Potter is Star Wars. You just look at the storyline.
J.K. Rowling basically took and made a Star Wars-esque type.
I thought Lord Voldemort was going to be Harry's father at the end. I really thought that was going to happen. So
It's why that it stands the test of time. It's unmatched in breadth.
isn't it funny that the 77 Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back hold up better than the prequels that we get later on as far as special effects go? There's something great about being simple, about the models that they use, the way that the special effects were done back then. It just felt more real. Now everything is kind of in digital format and you do it on a computer and it just doesn't have that same feel.
People aren't shooting anything on film anymore.
There's something about the practical effect that it feels tangible. It doesn't feel like a cartoon. And that was one of the big complaints about the prequels. One of the decisions to go away from practical effects was a massive miscalculation. And that's why J.J. Abrams, when he did the most recent trilogy, they used a lot of practical effects again. They wanted it to feel more authentic. CGI is good in some cases. In a lot of cases, the technology is mind-blowing, but it's still not the same as having something that you can touch. And that poses an interesting question. It's a massive warehouse on Skywalker Ranch, and it houses almost all of these models and stuff like that. If you could go in and have one thing from that warehouse, we'll take just Star Wars, the first movie, what would you want?
Well, darn it, I was going to go with Princess Leia's outfit from Return of the Jedi, but since it's just the original Star Wars movie.
I don't think it's your style, Ken. You can do better.
No, you can't pull it off.
I don't think you can pull it off.
Not now, but maybe in my younger days I could have. R2-D2, to be perfectly honest with you.
I want the
They have
Millennium
one of
Falcon.
Damn it, that's the one that I
Yep,
wanted.
I want the Falcon.
I would either want that or a section of the Death Star that they used to film the TIE fighter sequences. I think that'd be pretty cool too.
How about Darth Vader's TIE fighter himself?
That is a cool TIE fighter.
He has a badass TIE fighter.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And the TIE fighter guys, the actual pilots, those were one of my favorite.
They look pretty cool too. They look
were one
like
of
your
my
World War
favorite
II
figures.
kind of
Question.
pilots.
Here's the thing. We're in the Death Star. Why do you have all these people with helmets on? What's the point?
What's the deal
What's
with
the
all these
point
people
with
in
all the
helmets?
helmets?
I mean,
Yes,
Well, also too, the Empire doesn't believe in handrails.
apparently
You can
not.
people can just fall into pits.
It's
extended
one
bridge-
giant
wh-
OSHA
wh-
violation.
Yeah, why is there such like room for you to fall into nothingness?
Exactly.
Why isn't the bridge always extended? Why is it have?
And
Yeah,
why is
why?
it connected to the door?
Yeah, I ponder these questions at night.
But it was cool to find out when Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, they swing across. They really did that. That was really them that did that effect. It wasn't stunt doubles because they couldn't afford a lot of the stunt doubles.
Like in
They weren't-
Spaceballs.
Like in Spaceballs, you
Yeah.
captured
They
your
weren't-
stunt doubles.
Stunt doubles.
They weren't
yes.
They weren't big enough stars yet to have stunt doubles.
Right.
Right.
They're expendable.
They're like, we can risk them.
That scene is iconic. I don't know what he had there. Some type of rope, dental floss. I don't know what it was, but it was something for them to get across from one end to the other.
He took it off of the stormtrooper outfit, like a little grapple hook thing. You're a
Obi-Wan,
bit short for a stormtrooper.
he was a little bit short. That is one of the coolest scenes, though. We haven't talked about where they take Chewie up to the, I guess you could say, the detention hall or whatever it's called. Han is trying to talk to him, trying to pretend that he's one of them. He's like,
Major League.
Major League here. How's your day going?
Radiation, very, very dangerous.
Very dangerous, yeah. It's a good scene because of the fact that we get a princess who doesn't act like a princess. She takes charge. She realizes the boys didn't come through for her like they should have. and basically takes over. Granted, they have to go into the garbage dump. It's a very unusual scene. If
What
we
a
want to talk,
magnificent smell you've discovered, Your
Yes,
Highness.
your worshipness. There's all the weird nicknames he comes up.
that's kind of an interesting creative mind there from George Lucas, somehow being thrown into a garbage area, because that's not something that we see in any other type of movies, and it's kind of unique to this. That's again why where you say the storytelling is really good. Maybe the lines aren't the best, but I would argue that this is one of the most quoted movies of all time. And that's because some of these lines are just freaking awesome, especially what you were just saying, Eric. I mean, the one-liners that Han has for Princess Leia, it's funny. The go-between him and her throughout the movie is pretty impressive.
You know, one of the things that came into my mind as we were talking about this is up through the first three movies when I was a kid. One of the things that I pondered, why are stormtroopers wearing all of these outfits? And are they really human? You know, you see them changing into the stormtroopers' outfits, right, to disguise, but you never see what the stormtroopers look like. Are they human? Are they robots? We know now, but I mean at the
Yeah.
time when they were dead, you just saw them. You never saw a
Right.
mask come off or anything. And why
Yeah.
are they wearing all this stuff?
And when she says the line, "Aren't you kind of short to be a stormtrooper?" I didn't know what that really meant. I didn't
But
know
yet the
that
outfit
all
still fits him.
I didn't know that all the stormtroopers were basically the same height. And nobody else noticed either. I mean, that's the thing. They took Chewie up all the way to the top, and nobody questioned a short stormtrooper.
Right. Yeah.
Where are you taking this thing? And why are you 6 inches shorter than everybody else?
There are some interesting little things like that you can pick out of here that make it funny. The one that's always gotten me as an older person looking back on these is the fact, like I said before, Leia loses an entire planet and she's all fine with it, but Luke's despondent over the guy he met 2 days ago. It's like he can't get over it.
Hey, we're talking about Obi-Wan and the fight with Darth Vader. What do you think about the fight itself? I mean, now that we've seen other sequels and prequels and things of that nature, does this fight come off being a little anticlimactic now? And
It's a little
very-
low key. Yeah, but that's a good word. Anticlimactic. It is kind of.
It's low key, but it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's still one of the best, in my opinion.
Ken wants Darth
I-
Vader doing like cartwheels, like
Yeah.
Well, see, that's
Like
my
Yoda
problem with
going-
the prequels. That's what I start hating is when Jedi start to fly like Superman.
yeah.
Where
Yoda
they-
needs to try decaf.
That's true.
We'll discuss some of the problems, but there are some really iconic lightsaber duels. The one of Obi-Wan and Anakin in Revenge of the Sith is one of the best. Darth Maul versus Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan. That's another one that's pretty amazing. This is the OG lightsaber duel, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do, and it works because you get the whole notion that kind of like in The Princess Bride where they dueling with each other but they can still talk and they're going back and forth with each other, and that's something that you get in the rest of them as well. Of all of them, it's probably like my third favorite of the lightsaber duels because it's the original.
It sets
Sure.
everything up.
It just tells me that the other movies went a little too overboard in what they considered a Jedi being able to do as far as with their body and their movements with the lightsaber. I have no problem with this, to be perfectly honest with you. It's the other movies that when we talk about them, that I'm going to have a problem with how a Jedi is portrayed. And they do a better job later on in the sequels, toning it back down to what the original trilogy was. I mean, later on, we will see Luke. He does do a cartwheel, but there's nothing wrong with one cartwheel. It's when you're bouncing around, like you said, like Yoda does later on 5-hour energy drinks that is the problem. So
Yoda after a few monsters.
The best lightsaber duel, though, of all is the one from Empire Strikes Back. For me, that's the iconic one. Because of how it's shot, and we'll discuss that when we discuss Empire Strikes Back, but that is, for me, that's the definitive lightsaber
I'm
duel.
not going to argue with you on that. And we'll talk about that in our next episode, that lightsaber duel. But unfortunately, time for us to go to our reviews.
I think that's a wise move, Ken. Why don't you kick us off?
Well, Star Wars has been a part of my life for the last 46 years. It's been something that's easy to go to anytime. It comes on like TBS almost every month in some sort of way. And then you could watch it on Disney Plus now. And of course, I own my own copies, so I can go see it anytime I want. It's my childhood, just a part of my childhood that I remember and I hold on dearly. It does frustrate me a little bit that it's been touched by George Lucas for that 20th anniversary release. It irked me a little bit because I want to see it the way that it was originally released. Not originally intended, because I think that's what we have now, but originally released. The characters are great. They feed off each other very well. Mark Hamill for a new actor and Carrie Fisher as a new actress, they really do very well. The casting here is perfect for these particular characters, and especially Harrison Ford. We need him as Han Solo. I don't know if you can find another movie that has a perfect blend of these three characters that feed off each other the way they do. The special effects are amazing. Even though it's been touched up a little bit over the years, you could still mostly see what we saw in 77, and what we see in 77 is amazing. And to this day, it still blows my mind that they were able to do what they were able to do. This movie is a solid A for me. It's definitely a top 20 of all time movie for me. I will actually say this early just to throw it out there because I know Ted already said this, that he feels that Empire is a better movie. I prefer Star Wars to The Empire Strikes Back just because it has all the things that I liked about it as a child. I could see where George Lucas is coming from because I love Flash Gordon. I love Robin Hood. I love King Arthur. Those are things that are dear to me. And I see all those things in this movie. I don't get to see those in other movies later on. And so that's why I'm attracted to this movie more than all the others. So yes, again, it's an A.
All right. For me, this movie is also very iconic. I am not a person who is into sci-fi. There is a few limited sci-fi movies I like. I like your Star Treks with William Shatner. Don't get me started on Picard. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is one of my favorite movies of all time. Spoiler alert if we ever do that movie. But Star Wars definitely has something very close to my heart. It's one of those movies that, like Ken said, 46 years it's been in our lives. I can't think of anyone. Well, I can think of someone, namely, but most people out there, if they don't love Star Wars, they like Star Wars. It's very hard to find someone who does not like this movie. Even your hardcore people that are not in the sci-fi movies definitely have some type of affection for it, just because it's been ingrained into our society. I mean, Star Wars is just one of those movies that generally, if you go anywhere on the planet, you say the word Star Wars, they know what you're talking about. It's there. Everyone knows it. The movie has some flaws. Obviously, we're looking at it for 46 years, but the flaws are minimal. I'd say the main flaws are the added scenes, which you're right. Watching the movie with the added scenes it's not great. If you can get a copy of it and see it without it, definitely you're going to see a much better movie. It's going to make a lot more sense, and I think it's going to be more enjoyable overall. But even with the added scenes, the movie is still iconic. It's incredible. It's just something that I hold on to. Not an A, and I'm not going to tell you my thoughts on Empire Strikes Back, but this movie definitely is solid for me. It's an A minus. It'll be dear to my heart forever. Ted, do we even need to hear your review? Because I have an idea of what it is. But go ahead. You can spout.
Like both of you have said, this is my childhood. This is playing with the toys, with the figures, making up your own Star Wars story, watching the movies. There's something about Star Wars that it captivated me the first time I saw it. Because you go away to a place, and the first line that we see of the movie, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, immediately it takes you to another place. And the characters are all great. Like I said, Star Wars as itself stands alone, doesn't need any sequels. It's the only one that stands on its own merits. It's an amazing movie. People laugh, but almost once a month I watch this movie. It's one of the only movies that I can continually watch on a constant basis.
This movie, Star Wars, the original?
Yes.
Once a month?
Almost.
So you telling me that you see this movie conservatively 12 times a year?
Probably close to it. And it never gets old. As far as quoting this movie, there are people who won't watch the movie with me because I know all the lines. it means so much to me, and now it means so much to my daughter. I've been able to pass that along to her, and she will watch it with me.
Boy, imagine if your daughter hated Star Wars.
It would be she would have been adopted by another family.
Oh.
No, I'd laugh. No, that's not the case.
And his
But
daughter's name is Leia, by the way. No, just kidding.
yes,
So,
exactly.
I bet you pushed
Well,
that. Did you push Leia?
Well, twins runs in both of our families. I said that if we had a boy and girl, it was going to be Luke and Leia. This is a top 5 movie for me.
Oh, top 5.
We're talking the best of the best, in my opinion. I agree with Roger Ebert. 2 centuries from now, this is a story that'll still be iconic because of how amazing it is. This is a A+. I can't give it anything higher other than the fact that, like I said, I watch it almost once a month. It's totally shaped everything for me.
Unfortunately for me, my daughter prefers the prequels, so I might be putting her up for adoption.
Wow.
That says more about you as a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What the hell? Seriously.
It means that I shouldn't have had kids to begin with.
Well, here's the thing. We're going to see this as we go. There's a whole generation that Star Wars is one of those things that it imprints upon you as a child. And that's why we have a generation now, like Katie, who their first look at Star Wars was through the prequels.
Yep.
Does Katie like Harry Potter?
Yes, she loves Harry Potter.
See, Harry Potter is kind of like the Star Wars for our kids.
Well, like what Ted is saying here as well, though, is that people don't choose to watch it in order of when it was released. They choose to watch it now in what they consider chronological order, which I disagree in that because of the technology that is in the first 3 episodes compared to 4, 5, and 6. All of a sudden you go from seeing all these type of special effects to seeing a different type of special effects, and it doesn't translate to maybe the younger generation. They feel like, for the look of it, doesn't resonate with them as much as the episodes 1, 2, and 3 do. Even though I say, well, what about the romance in episode 2? And they'll admit that that's pretty bad, but just for them, it's just the look of it. But for us, we get revelations of things in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi that nobody knew at the time. So it was brand new. Whereas when they come into 1, 2, and 3 now, they know all that stuff. They're already aware of the relationship between Luke and Leia and Luke and Darth Vader and all that good stuff. And so 4 and 5, 6 doesn't really have that same feel to them than it does to us.
That's very true.
It's very true. But it also, too, it makes an imprint because this generation that's come now that likes the prequels a lot. I don't fault them because they were playing with the prequel toys.
True.
So I can't fault anybody for that. I mean,
they like Jar Jar Binks.
We can fault them for that. Does
again,
Katie like Jar Jar Binks?
I believe she does, yes.
Oh my goodness.
But she also likes another furry animal that we'll talk about in episode 6. We will save all that information for when we do our prequels next year.
Don't be ripping on the Ewoks.
I didn't say anything about Ewoks.
I didn't say Ewoks.
You said episode 6. I know where you're going.
Maybe little furry little animals that should be put on a spigot and over a roasted fire.
They eat people.
I bet you they taste better.
They're vicious.
They're vicious. And so cuddly and cute.
So is a Chihuahua, but I don't care for them either.
How about the Jawas? They're cute. Little Jawas.
Jawas are actually on open fire.
Wow.
Ding, 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 ding. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Of course, we are going to be doing The Empire Strikes Back from 1980, episode 5. We're all looking forward to that. Ted, tell us where they can find us on the World Wide Web.
We can be found on Twitter at hookedon_movies, and whatever podcast format you're listening to us on, whether it be Apple, Spotify, and then Good Pods. If you can, leave us a 5-star review and click subscribe. All of those things help us get noticed. And the more reviews we get, the closer we get to our goal of hopefully one day being Rotten Tomatoes certified.
Maybe one day we will be on that pedestal. What's going on Facebook?
So join us on Facebook, Hooked on Movies. go ahead and search us out and ask to join the group. And you'll have access to some of our movie clips for these movies that we're reviewing and other things that we're discussing as far as other movies and other actors and actresses, and just things that are happening in Hollywood in general.
Yeah, some good stuff out there.
And check us out on the Dorkening Network. We can be found there and listen to some of the other great podcasts that are available through that network.
All right. Well, thank you once again, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'm not wearing any pants. Film at 11.
May the Force be with you.
See you next time on Hooked on Movies.